So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this event on transformative approaches for agroforestry and innovation for biodiversity. We have convened an esteemed panel of experts, but before I invite the experts to join, I would like to invite our keynote speaker, Carlos Ruiz, for the UNFCCC Secretariat. He is the team lead for the Adaptation Committee. Carlos, it will be a pleasure to hear from you, and then I will introduce our speakers.
Julie, it's great to have you here, and it's great to have this wonderful panel, the audience. We are broadcasting from the COP Pavilion at COP29, and this event will be broadcasted in YouTube. Thank you also for hosting us, and a big thanks to our partners. We are today partnering with INBAR on matters related to bamboo action for climate, and we are, of course, very happy to partner and co-organize this event as well with wonderful colleagues of the ICA, the Inter-American Institute for Agriculture Research. And it's really great to have you all. Maybe a little bit of background on the session itself and why we are broadcasting from COP28. I'm speaking on behalf of our director who is supporting the negotiations, but it's with great pleasure to see the best way to activate the agriculture sector within the climate equation. And we can see, of course, what are the potentials and opportunities for climate action from different angles, not only from the angles of mitigation, but also its great potential to unlock activities and action and the adaptation and resilience. So this is really a COP that is broadcasting a number of developments. In the mitigation front, we have a very good opening with the removals methodologies as approved by the supervisory body. In the carbon mechanism front, this is something that was pending and is connected with the global stocktake coming from COP28. But also we see in other fronts very good news in the front of adaptation. Particularly there is momentum as the global goal on adaptation and the UI framework for global climate resilience is an interesting outcome from COP28 that is unlocking a number of targets, a number of goals, and indicators that will, of course, require increased ambitions, particularly on one of the targets connected to ecosystem services. And we are here to help unlock parties' potential to put that in their NDCs, in their NAPs, in their long-term strategies, and create really the space to bring these benefits along. The reason why we wanted to focus on nature-based solutions, and in this particular session on agroforestry system, is because we are connecting what has been discussed in previous sessions on agriculture with what we discussed in the previous session on bamboo. And within that context, of course, these ecosystem actions, they are integral. They bring a number of cross-cutting elements, not only from nature, but also from the communities, local communities, indigenous groups, and all the different cross-cutting aspects of means of implementation. And agroforestry seems to be a really powerful sector where we can a lot of this potential. So with this setting the scene intervention, I would like now to pass the floor to Julie. Maybe also you can introduce yourself and help us out to invite the panelists so that we can hear and learn more from their organizations, what they are doing and what facilities are their organizations providing to parties and participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Carlos. And I would like to invite here at the front Dr. Mohammed Ibrahim, the Technical Cooperation Director from ICA. I would like to invite His Excellency Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries, Blue and Green Economy for Dominica, and the representative of Panama, Deputy Director of Climate Change, Ministry of Environment, Angel Urena, and Juan Lucas Restrepo from SIAT, and Mr. Tristan Tirel, CBD Secretariat representative as well. And of course, Dr. Durai Yaraman, I'm sorry for mispronouncing your name, Director of the Global Program for INBAR. So if you'd like to join us. And whilst we ensure that everyone has a seat, I would like to introduce myself. I am Julia Weatherhog. I am the lead for the Climate Resilient Food Systems Alliance, which is an ensemble of 40 different UN and non-UN organizations working on the intersection between food and climate change. We also have 20 governments who have endorsed the alliance, and the alliance is currently housed within the UNFCCC Secretariat. And we have different lines of work at the global, regional, and local level, especially as well. And that's why I was so pleased to join the moderation of this panel when Carlos offered the opportunity, because there is so much potential at the sweet spot between agriculture, biodiversity, land preservation. And then Carlos told me about the experts that he had, so I jumped on the opportunity, and I'm honored to be with you here today. I understand that some of the speakers time constraints, so we're going to alter the order of the panel slightly, and I apologize in advance for any mishaps protocol-wise, but I'm going to invite to speak as the first person the Technical Cooperation Director for ICA, Dr. Mohammed Ibrahim. So we know that ICA has made great advances in agroforestry, and we know that there are a range of innovative solutions that can be adopted nowadays. And I would be very eager to learn more myself about the work that your organization is doing. So if you could pick a couple of highlights for us to flag with the audience, that would be great.
Well, very good afternoon, and thank you for inviting us to participate in this panel. Let me begin to say that ICA is the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture that works throughout of Latin America and the Caribbean, and with a focus of promoting the policies, more as a new generation of policies that will address the issues of that we are discussing today. The multiple challenges for the planetary crisis, which is on biodiversity and on climate change, pollution, but also what are the impacts we have on the social and inclusion in terms of have a gender focus, and what are the issues, the socioeconomic issues that are affecting the farmers, especially with the family farming that works in this area. That, as we have seen, the disruption of the supply chains, for example, which is translated in large increases in the prices of the commodities that they're purchasing. In terms of agroforestry, we are keen that this is a win-win situation to address the multiple objectives of food security or the food system transformation, and understanding that what is out from the Eat Lancet report of the need to reconfigure the food systems, to look at the improving the nutrition and also the diets, but also looking at the planetary boundaries in terms of how do you keep the safe operating space in terms of water, biodiversity, and pollution, and other factors. We think agroforestry is a tool and has been proven with good scientific evidence of the impacts of that. For example, in the theme of biodiversity, we have present here Dr. Celia Harvey, who has published extensively on the role of agroforestry in agricultural landscapes and what are the importance in terms of looking at the functions in terms of provisioning, regulating, etc. So ICA as an institution has been supporting the governments to work on the NDCs, in which agriculture is part of the solution to looking at the mitigation objectives, but including nature-based solutions, agroforestry practices, in which has been advancing. And I think that we need to put more emphasis on the adaptation and how do we work on the NAP, because many of the farmers, especially the small farmers, are facing much difficulties in terms of there are many barriers for adopting or scaling up agroforestry systems, especially because as it relates to the knowledge, but also in terms of the finance and de-risking the climate finance, which we have been supporting to work on that. So that's one of the areas we've been working in terms of the NDCs, but also working, we see a need of looking at intersectoral policies. You can see that many of the governments, teams on climate change is in the Ministry of Environment, whereas the Ministry of Agriculture is setting policies. How can you look at the strategies for biodiversity, for water, for strategies for agriculture sectors? Understanding the need for a landscape approach in terms of how do you look at ecosystem services, but at the same time advancing on the resilience in that. ICA has also been supporting the countries to work on the NAMAs for coffee, for livestock. For example, in Costa Rica, we are working on the livestock, on bananas, coffee, and many of the countries to support them with the tools and knowledge, but also looking at the metrics that you need to monitor the impacts, on, for example, in the carbon removals. And more recently, on the deforestation-free commodities, which you know the European Union has been working on. I think now they have put forward this on another date in terms of the deforestation. In Central America, a large percentage of the coffee and cocoa is being produced with good agroforestry practices. In fact, the first shipment of deforestation-free coffee came out of Costa Rica a few months ago. And supporting these farmers on the tools to looking at the transparency and traceability of how do you monitor this, but also looking at what is the transaction cost that you're going to have, because we know that the traceability to measure on the very small farms, we've been working to look at how to apply more the satellite imagery to look from a more jurisdictional point of view. And on top of that, in the developing of the agriculture strategies, agroforestry is part of the policies for advancing in the decision-making and promoting the sustainable practices and sustainable intensifications of these systems.
Thank you very much. And I really like the way you phrased it in the sense that agriculture can be really part of the solution. It's not just something terrific that we need to worry about. No? We always hear this narrative of the agricultural sector producing 33% of global emissions. But agroforestry is really one of those game-changing approaches that, if implemented the right way, has a huge potential. So we've heard a little bit about the ICA's work at the regional and global level, but we hear about also the importance of policies. No? And here we have His Excellency, the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and the Blue and Green Economy for Dominica. And I would be really keen, because I also work on the ground with countries as well, to learn about what kind of environment, enabling environment we can create for these policies, and if you have any examples that you would like to highlight for the benefit of the audience.
Thank you for this question, and good evening, everyone. Dominica is a very forested country. We have around 80% forest coverage, 20% of which is protected by law. You know, so there are legislations to protect at least 20% of the forest in Dominica. We have 2 national parks. One of them is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and we also have 2 forest reserves, the Central and the Northern Forest Reserve. So in this part of the island, you cannot have no agricultural activity taking place there because they are protected by law. You know, so that's one of the policies that was translated into legislation to ensure that we have sections of our forest protected, not just the trees, but also the wildlife and what lives in the forest. I must say, because of that, Dominica can proudly boast that we are net zero in terms of carbon emission. In addition to that, Dominica is an island that is very frequently by hurricanes and storms. So in 2017, when we were affected by Hurricane Maria, about 80% of the forest cover was damaged, severely damaged by the hurricane. All trees defoliated, some were broken, some fell through. But since we have been seeing some rejuvenation. But the forestry division in itself went on a rapid reforestation program. And what we did, we incorporated agroforestry in the mix. So we had a target, a policy directive of planting 1 million trees in the forest as we try to rejuvenate the forest. But working closely with the Ministry of Agriculture, a ministry which I lead, we incorporated the Agroforestry program where we have incorporated tree crops, not only forest trees, but tree crops, which will serve as a means of feed, for the wildlife that live in the forest. Because you would appreciate that after Hurricane Maria, the habitat for the wildlife was destroyed, and they had no feed or no food to feed on. And what you observe, the wildlife were encroaching into where people live, and which because they was seeking food, to survive. So the introduction of agroforestry in the reforestation program really assisted, the wildlife to migrate back into the natural habitat to a similar feed. How do we balance preserving the forest and agricultural production? Because Dominica is one of the countries that supply a lot of Caribbean countries with fresh produce, and our main economy pillar is agriculture, which contributes around 17% of the GDP. And we are very mountainous, steep island, so we have limited flat lands for cultivation. So we are forced to cultivate on the slopes. So to do that well, across or around the forest reserve, we have buffer zones, so farmers cannot encroach into the forest. And our cultivation practices along the slope, we incorporate practices like slope stabilization, using grass barriers. We do contour drains, to ensure that we reduce erosion, and we do a lot of mixed cropping, to protect the erosion through weathering. So our system is kind of multifaceted. I could say regenerative as well, because we depend on agriculture as a main pillar for our economy. And of course, we are mountains island, and we take pride in preserving our forests. So we do a balance in both to ensure that we preserve and ensure that we produce, to ensure that we have food security on our island.
Thank you very much, Excellency. I think that's a brilliant example and really setting the pace for other countries to follow suit. And I think it's really impressive that you're already at the stage of bringing the wildlife back as well. So congratulations on that success. Now, Carlos, I see that we have an speaker, and I think it's going to be Tristan at this point, or no? Sorry, I just lost my moderation notes. Mr. Angel Ureña, Deputy Director of Climate Change, Ministry of Environment, Panama. I understand that that's the step. He's gone. Sorry. So who is missing?
Tristan had to lead to the negotiations.
Okay.
So next will be
Tristan. Okay, sorry, Tristan. So I've had Tristan actually yesterday in one of the panels as well, and Tristan is running the convention on biodiversity. So Tristan, I am quite well versed on your work by now, but for the benefit of the audience, what are the takeaways that we can flag in terms of biodiversity conservation, and is there any work that you're doing now, especially on agroforestry approaches as well?
Thank you very much, Julia, and thank you very much to the organisers of this event for the invitation. Yes, indeed, my name is Tristan Tyrrell. I'm the Programme Officer responsible for biodiversity, climate change and dry and subhumid lands at the CBD Secretariat. I'm speaking on behalf of my colleague, Monica Kobayashi, who is the Programme Officer responsible, in particular related to Target 10 under the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which talks about sustainable agriculture, aquaculture, forestry and fisheries practices. And very much emphasizes, although it doesn't use the word agroforestry, it talks about agroecological methods in looking at some of these more sort of resource use elements when it comes to biodiversity, to ecosystems, to the natural environment. So now that the GBF has been adopted about 2 years ago at this point, parties are revising their national biodiversity strategies and action plans. So that's obviously historically within the Ministries of Environment or even within small offices within those ministries. But one of the big things to push with the KMGBF is this whole of society, whole of government approach, and to recognize that it's not just a nice to have, the role of nature, but actually it's fundamental to help us, one, I suppose, in the longer term view, this vision of 2050 to put us on track to living in harmony with nature, but certainly on a more day-to-day basis about understanding this fundamental underpinning that nature provides us throughout all of our lives, but not least when it comes to our food security and our ultimately our health and well-being. So as parties are revising their national biodiversity strategies and action plans, we as the Secretariat are trying to encourage them to think about, well, what are these approaches and how are they relevant across the various sectors, not least when it comes to the agricultural sector, fisheries, etc., to think about, well, what are the approaches that you can take? Think about what's the sustainability of the methods that you are using, the incentives that you're providing to those people who are working on these on a day-to-day basis, to think about, well, what is the long-term viability and sustainability of some of these practices? And of course, thinking about them in the specific context within which the countries themselves are operating. So it's very interesting to hear about Dominica and about some of the realities you're facing compared to, say, in Canada, where we are based, where you have large expanses of very flat land, and thinking about some of the approaches, some of the more sort of heavily industrialized approaches that maybe might be more appropriate there. But again, then, of course, questioning, well, what is the long-term sustainability in terms of soil health, etc. And of course, in particular, in context with the discussions today, in a changing climate. How are we helping people to adapt to a changing climate? How are we helping to ensure that there is long-term security when it comes to food systems and ultimately to our health and well-being? So concepts like agroforestry are being considered, certainly are being quite well received by parties, even those with very heavily industrialized agricultural systems, to think about, well, what are the options that are available? But of course, it also needs consumer demand to follow that. It needs government regulation to help to support those farmers who do tend to take, who do want to take some of these approaches, to try and ensure that there's a level playing field as such. Sorry, that's a terrible metaphor given the context. But that those who are looking at more sustainable approaches, less heavily industrialized approaches, are not necessarily losing competitive advantage, or at least that there is competitive advantage for them as much as there is for others. And thinking about it, well, how do we one, educate consumers? How do we ensure that government systems are supporting them and including, not least, the subsidy frameworks? Thinking about, well, what are the positive incentives to get people to consider some of these approaches? Just quickly to finalize, we talk a lot about linking to NDCs and NAPs and some of these other policy processes, especially when we come to the likes of a UNFCCC COP. But of course, it's not just that. It's also thinking about various sort of extension programs and various other things linking to what's the work of the UN system at the national level, across certainly at the national level, but also at the regional level, and thinking about how to get everyone working together. Within the CBD, it is a little bit of a sensitive subject because there are some people who are very much in the convention for the intrinsic value of biodiversity, and so when it comes to things around use, that can be quite difficult, especially when you start talking about how you're engaging with the private sector and some of the others. So perhaps agroforestry could be sort of elevated within the discussions beyond where it is now. But I would say that generally on a national level, there is a lot of interest in this, and parties are looking for support from the various agencies, the experts, on how to implement this in light of the various other commitments, including the KMGBF and the Paris Agreement and other things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tristan. And I guess maybe reading through the lines, what you're saying is that we can look forward to this elevation of agroforestry within your convention as well. And so it's a space to watch. Now I'd like to move on to the Director of Global Programs for IMBAR, Durai Jayarama. I'm so sorry. I've been moderating 5 events and messing up all the names of the speakers, so I really apologize. I myself have a terrible surname, so I know how that feels. So I really wanted to learn a little bit more about INBAR's involvement in terms of global mitigation and adaptation goals and the role that agroforestry plays in this respect. So over to you.
Thank you very much. Firstly, we would like to thank the organizers for the invitation. So UNBAR is an intergovernmental organization with some 51 member states across the global south, from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And UNBAR is also the observer to the 3 conventions: UNCCD, UNCBD, and UNCCC also. So UNBAR as an organization, we work on 4 different aspects. One is to put bamboo into the global sphere, to create awareness on the potential of the bamboo, unlike rattan, so that and also we work on creating the communication, the knowledge products through the action research project site which we undertake. So agroforestry, bamboo as a commodity is like a set of 100. It's a set of 1,600 species. So it grows across the agroclimates in the tropical, some subtropical regimes, and there are bamboo which grows few centimeters, and there are bamboos which is as big as a tree. So there is a very wide species of bamboo which are available, and we support action research and projects on all aspects of bamboo, be it planting material production, planting, some value addition of the bamboo, or your market research, standards, and some certification. So unless we address all the elements of the value chain, so it would not be, there will not be an uptake to take that bamboo into that sphere. So particularly on the sphere of agroforestry, we have done plenty of researches on how bamboo can be integrated. There are so many forms of agroforestries, like block planting of the bamboo, and we have some mushrooms being integrated into that. There are some chickens being integrated into that. There are some medicinal plants being integrated into that, and so we study the species interactions, the spacing, the planting methods, the planting models. So I would also be having a presentation on afterwards on how bamboo can be integrated into all these different forms. And with these studies, with these earnings, we came to the international platforms to share it with the international audience, to use bamboo as a tool, and not only to create jobs, but also to protect the environment, to encourage some food security. So that's how we do with bamboo as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. I understand that also bamboo, I was just learning from other speakers that it also has a huge potential in terms of substituting products that are made from plastic as well. So I find that really fascinating, and I mean it's an incredible testament to your work, the fact that you are already integrating different as well. So thanks for bringing this experience. Now I turn to our last speaker, and once again I apologize in advance for any mispronunciations. Juan Lucas Restrepo Ibiza, Director General of the Alliance of Biodiversity International, CIAT and CGIAR. We've heard from our speakers the different experiences at the regional level, at the convention level, and the innovative approaches for different cultures as well at the national level. But now I turn to you in the sense of coming from a research institution and an institution that supports innovations and innovative approaches as well through research and support to countries and capacity building. Could you give us some examples of how your organization is really supporting transformative agroforestry innovations? A couple of examples will suffice, and then maybe we can have some time as well for an exchange with the audience.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. You can hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, great. So a few things. First, when you talk about agroforestry, you need to understand that it's usually connected with other elements of a larger value chain, and we heard this from the rattan and bamboo examples. So when you look at cocoa, coffee, livestock, silvopastoral systems are agroforestal systems that need to be understood as a whole. So in silvopastoral systems, and this is my first example, we see often that people tend to focus only on the tree and the functionality of the tree in the livestock system and forget that you need forages, you need pasture, and that those pastures also need to be well integrated into the system, because if the pasture fails, the tree is not going to provide a lot of support for the system as a whole. So the first thing is just having like an integral view of how the tree in itself enters a production system and what is its functionality. And that has been from our science a lot of the work we've been doing from the times where we were 50 years ago at FAO, and we supported genetic resources networks, just understanding and supporting regions and countries on what was that diversity, especially on trees, understanding the diversity of trees, and over time also linking that understanding of that diversity with the use. And the use has, there's many possibilities, of course, carbon sequestration, soil restoration, water retention, further symbiosis, etc., etc. What we're doing now, and this is my second example, is that we're saying, how do we integrate the knowledge on the forest diversity, genetic diversity, with the use? And we launched a platform that's already managed to be used in a few thousand hectares that's called My Farm Trees. And what My Farm Trees does is that we identify that tree that could be in a natural forest or in a farm that is the best or one of the best seed suppliers for a value chain, and a genetic diversity within the species, so we do not rely on a single source. And then how through a blockchain we help move that into nurseries from small farmers. School nurseries are an amazing way to do this. And then depending on the function of that tree, how we help bring those trees into the farms. So they are well placed in farms. They serve a very specific purpose on the farms. They provide ecosystem services. And through this blockchain that helps with a very simple telephone report on the health of that tree, have governments and international organizations providing payments for ecosystem services for the tree. So it's an approach where you connect digital elements, modern digital technologies with deep knowledge of genetic resource diversity. Just to finalize, agroforestry has an amazing return on investment. There is lots of studies signaling that. However, it takes a significant cost to implement, and the financial mechanisms are still not there, and the policy regulators prefer still to support and subsidize short cycle endeavors, that these systems that take a bit longer to establish but are more resilient and have amazing payouts both economically and in terms of their environmental services.
Thank you very much, Juan Lucas. And I think that's a brilliant example in terms of, the digital services, the data, and that knowledge of genetic resources as well, which we need to keep for future generations. So now I wonder whether it would be a good moment to open the floor to the audience to see whether there are any questions for our group of experts, because I know that all of us are attending a lot of different events at COP, and we don't want to make this session a heavy download on you guys, but rather an opportunity for an exchange with this set of very diversified expertise. So I'm just looking at the floor to see if there are any volunteers to break the ice for the first question, and I see a lady in the back row. Maybe I can give her one of the mics.
Hi, this is a question to all of you. Does AI already play a role in your projects and your policies, maybe in cooperation between you at the CBD Secretariat and so on?
So a question to all speakers. I'm just looking around. Whoever makes eye contact with me is going to be the person who responds. So I see Juan Lucas.
Yes, I can help provide a little insight. We've been working for a number of years now with a foundational model supported by Google Research on computer vision. And this is a model that we are currently using with beans as our prototype crop, but we're now expanding to a very large number of crops, especially those of higher relevance to Africa. And of course, moving from there to trees is going to be very easy. And it's all about phenotyping. And phenotyping is allowing breeders, allowing that very costly and lengthy process to shorten the cycle just by having citizen science, farmers with very simple pictures, easy to take, provide insights on what is happening at the field, and then help and support and speed up selection processes to bring new, more resilient materials to the field. So it's not happening in trees yet, but AI is so fast that it's going to happen any moment.
Thank you very much. And I see another response coming.
A standpoint would be the application of tools in advancing and looking at planning agriculture more towards precision agriculture also. And the use of artificial intelligence applications. There are good examples where they're used how to look at shade in agroforestry systems and how you design these agroforestry systems, understanding the traits of the plants and what are the functions that they have in terms of provisioning ecosystems, they have in terms of timber or whatever. Or the value they will have in terms of timber or services, in terms of the design of the system. So approach it, yeah. And I'm sorry, I have to leave now because I go to another event.
Thanks. Yes, the speakers are in high demand. So, but thank you for joining us. I appreciate that. So I hope your question was addressed. And now I'm looking around to see if there are any other questions that we would like to raise to the speakers. Please don't be shy and take the opportunity. So just having a quick look, I see there is a gentleman in the second row and then a lady.
Thank you very much. I'm Zuide from Malawi. Could you explain your... first is, have you used in your programs agroforestry for carbon markets? And if the answer is yes, I think there's the issue of coming up with these allometric equations to estimate the carbon. I don't know what is your experience that looking at the different species that we put on the farm integrating with crops. So if you have some experience of that, could you share? Thank you very much.
So maybe, Durai, I'm looking at you because you're nodding. Do you have any experience specifically on agroforestry and carbon markets?
Yes. Specifically, okay. UNBAR as the intergovernmental organization, we have developed the methodology to measure the carbon in the bamboo forest. So this is so we have a validated some methodological publication available. And in addition to that, we have supported several allometric research sites across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So we have developed allometric equations of approximately 15 species of bamboo, which is predominantly available. Through these allometric equations or model, there is a possibility to measure the carbon in the agroforest also. Like bamboo, there are two different classifications of bamboo. So one variety of bamboo is growing into the whole farms. Another variety of the bamboo is a clumping bamboo, which grows as an agroforest, as a shelter belt. So all this kind of methodology is available, and you can use the so all these some methodologies and approaches and allometric models are available in our website, so which can be used freely by the people who are interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I see that there's a lady who's ready for another question.
Yes, thank you. My name is Celia Harvey from Rainforest Alliance, and we know that agroforestry can deliver very important climate, biodiversity and livelihood benefits. So I'm just wondering, what do we need to do to scale it up? Could the panelists say something about what government policies could help foster greater use of agroforestry, and also what sorts of financial incentives or mechanisms could help farmers establish the systems and cover that investment that's required at the beginning? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Celia. So the question is on financial incentives, but also government and policy incentives as well. So I'm looking at speakers on this side. Maybe, Excellency, you would like to take the one on the policy incentives.
Yes, thank you for that. On the policy incentives, currently we don't have an incentive per se to incentivize farmers to go into agroforestry. But what we do is more education, the importance of agroforestry and the benefits of it. For example, we use fruit trees as buffer zones in my island, and we also use them as windbreaks when we do other crops. So, for example, a plant like banana that is very vulnerable to high winds and tropical storms, we would use avocados, we can use mangoes, we can use citrus as windbreaks to accommodate that. So they can be dual purpose as windbreaks and as a cash crop, as well. So what we do, we educate the farmers as to the benefits of that and what can be derived from practicing agroforestry. As I said, in the mix of our reforestation, we are pushing tree crops as an agroforestry, and so far, out of the million plants that we have targeted to plant, we have already planted 300,000. And what we try to do is try to bring back the exotic tree crops that we have been losing, germplasms over the years. So again, we got the opportunity to reintroduce some of the germplasms that we found that were kind of disappearing, back into the mainstream agriculture. And so another strategy we use in educating is that we work with the schools, the children. We encourage them to plant a tree crop, and we also have a program where we encourage homeowners to at least plant a tree crop in the backyard so that they can sustain themselves as from food security. So that's the approach that we're taking, is more educating and preaching the benefits to not just the farmers and foresters, but also homeowners as to the significance of planting a tree.
Thank you very much. And I see Juan Lucas would also like to revert, maybe also on the financial side.
Yes, to add to the financing bit, maybe one thing that has not come so strong in the conversation is that agroforestry systems tend to be complex systems. They need a lot of knowledge. They need a lot of management. if a farmer doesn't take appropriate action in the farm, they are prone to failure. And that's why it's the financial sector sometimes is risk averse, because there is so many of those projects that after a few years are not providing the benefits they should. So you need to make sure for things to work, to bundle financial mechanisms with technical assistance, with extension services, so the two go together, so the farmer with his or her own knowledge plus all of these technical assistance make sure that in the 2-3 years that one of these systems takes to be fully established, they get all the skills and capability to manage it in a sustainable manner into the future, so it doesn't degrade, because if it degrades, then you cannot pay for the debt. So it's just bundling the two things, financing with technical assistance.
Thank you very much, Juan Lucas. And if I may add also a reflection from my side, I think Juan Lucas had mentioned the importance of return of investment in agroforestry approaches. No? So I feel like that is not yet as well documented as it could be in terms of the return on investment, but also like the cost of continuing with the business as usual that we're on the current trajectory. So that being said, I see that Carlos, you have a question. So Carlos is one of the hosts of the event. So Carlos, over to you.
Thank you so much, Julie. So this session is also around transformative innovation. Very catchy wording for identifying the demand for innovation. So one of the problems that we have is that our systems value, recognize, and provide incentives for those at the end of the chain that are decarbonizing. But actually, to design an agroforestry system that is low carbon, that is innovative, that is resilient, like, for example, for the hurricanes that Her Highness was mentioning, and all of this combination of different arrangements that calls to innovators, entrepreneurs to work on the potential of artificial intelligence and unlock solutions that will help us to move the needle for the Convention and the Paris Agreement. We don't have such a platform that calls for innovators. So I was wondering if, in your experiences, how can we change this, and how can we best use for example, instruments like the NDCs and other similar instruments under the conventions, the CBD and the UNCCD and others that are also incubating and creating spaces for innovation? How can we help countries like Dominica or Panama, that was previously here, to broadcast what is needed, so that then we will have the actors that are not yet very often in our COPs to come here, get this demand, and go and do the innovations that will help to propel action.
Thank you, Carlos. Did you have a speaker in mind to address the question, or is it open to everyone? Tristan?
Thanks very much, Carlos, for the question. I think actually it comes back to Juan Lucas's point about the complexity with some of these discussions, and the need to bring all these right people together into the space. Certainly, the ones that come to the CBD will certainly have maybe a more of an ecological slant, but are we getting the right people in terms of the farming communities, the various representatives that they might have? The private sector, etc. Are they coming as part of those discussions? I think here under UNFCCC it's perhaps slightly better, just because there are bigger constituencies of people participating. But then again, they are coming very much from a specific climate perspective. So it's how do you bring all of these people together in a space that actually allows them to benefit from it, and we don't end up having, frankly, sort of hour-long discussions, but otherwise not really getting into the weeds. Sorry, throw that one in there as well. Yeah, I think we need to figure out what that space would be. And I certainly from a convention perspective, the role that governments, that parties play in as they should be doing in terms of convening the right actors together when it comes to developing their national policies, both in terms of the actual development of those policies or revisions, as the case may be with NBSAPs and NDCs and things, but certainly when it comes to the sort of agricultural policies and things, that they're coming together for that stage, but also then the implementation of it. And it's not just to get the right words on the page in the policy itself, but then thinking about, well, what's the implementation? What are the means being provided to ensure that that implementation is going forward? And even if it's not a question of providing financial support for agroforestry or whatever the case may be for whatever reason, it's also thinking about, well, what are the incentives that are actually providing roadblocks to stopping some of these practices, and thinking about, well, how can we address those, not necessarily just throwing cash at the problem, but also thinking about what are the fundamental blockages that need to be addressed as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tristan. And really like making sure that whatever approach we end up taking as a global community is needs driven as well, like really from the demand coming from the countries, from the parties, from the local communities, as they are the guardians most often than not of forests and trees. So I'm looking again at the audience just to see if there is a question. There is indeed a gentleman in the back. So over to you.
Yes, okay. So my name is Lukman from Ghana. I represent 3T here. We are into reforestation of degraded lands. So if there's anybody here who wants to invest in carbon capture, I would ask you to look to Ghana, where the political atmosphere is so stable, and look to us. You stand to make a good deal. So yes, the question goes to you, sir. I didn't get the name initially because I was writing something when you were being introduced, and then to Your Excellency. So the first question is, we have about 7,400 hectares of land we are planting currently. The land seems to be so mosaic. There are patches of farms, specifically cocoa farms, and then degraded lands and forest. So in your study and your activities, have you come across any allometric equations that can be used to measure carbon stock for cocoa? Yes. And then the second question goes to Your Excellency. The introduction of tree crops to attract biodiversity is brilliant. We intend to do something like that. But the question is it limited to only the animals you intend to attract or preserve? Are people allowed to also have access to these fruits? If yes, is there any framework or regulation to kind of manage it? Because I see a time will come where these animals and people will compete for the same food. So, yeah, kind of.
Okay, so maybe first.
Thank you very much for the question. I think he actually specifically focused on the bamboo and rattan. So I'm sure that I have came across some studies which also study the urban in the cocoa plantation, and also the allometric model for that. So generally, we as an organization, I as an individual, I only focused on the bamboo and rattan. So thank you.
Thanks, Your Excellency. I think the next question was more in terms of, can the fruits be shared with people, and is there a regulatory framework for this?
That's a very, very good question, actually. The tree crops that are used for reforestation, as I said earlier, they're focused in the forest reserve and national parks. So we don't expect human activity in there. We have a situation now, although some of the wildlife have been migrating back, where the wildlife, because of the destruction of the habitat due to the hurricanes, they are feeding on agricultural produce on the farm. And farmers experience losses because of that. And there's no form of policy to compensate farmers due to damage done by wildlife. So seeing that they are being planted in the forest reserves or in national park, humans are not supposed to harvest or feed on them. But of course, you will find one or two persons encroaching. But if they are caught, though, they can be penalized, because you're not supposed to have any activity in this reserve, particularly the UNESCO World Heritage Site. So it's protected by law. Yeah.
Good. I see we have one more question on the front row.
Thank you very much, and it has been an excellent place for information. My specialty is in industry, not in forestry. And I wonder how, in a very easy way, because as you have said, it's not that a simple problem, it's really very complex. How can medium, small, and perhaps big companies, production companies, are able to understand the importance to send some money or to produce products through this kind of beginning with rehabilitation or forestry, having the scope that in the future there's going to change the economic way of doing it. Every company has to change their production or their products because products are changing all days. But now rehabilitation and forests and ecosystems are going to be or should be a very important part of the economy sectors in the future. So how we can canalize money or resources, as you have said, but in a very easy way. How can a medium company can send some part of their resources to help to make all those works, but in a very easy way, because right now it's very difficult. I understand the carbon credits, but it's not that easy to get that. You have to make a lot of measures. You have to do a lot of things. So perhaps there's a program in which you are thinking to make things easier.
So thank you for that question. I think that's also expressing a need for the private sector to find a more easy and accessible way to contribute to regenerative agriculture and agroforestry approaches as well. So I'm looking at the speakers just to see, and they're all avoiding my eye. So I think that could mean that there is no easy way at the moment, but I think we're in a theory of change by which that way needs to come to the forefront in the coming years. I know that big corporations are investing more and more in regenerative agriculture and agroforestry as well, all around the world, but it's also really to bring at the forefront the hidden cost of our agricultural commodities consumption, no? And really, as you said, to restructure the way that companies produce. And we speak a lot about just transition in the energy field, but we need to speak about a just transition in the agricultural fields as well. So I'm sorry, but I think there is no silver bullet at the moment. But we are all hopeful for the next years. But thank you for the question. I see there is one more question.
Thank you. I think it's a very, very relevant question. Unfortunately, our colleagues from ICA had to leave, but we had a very good experience that was in Guatemala a couple of weeks ago, where the private sector, we visit some agroforestry setups with coffee plantations and that are embarking in these actually important topics. And the negotiators were trained and also looking in the field how this all looks like, the negotiators from Latin America. And they understood the complexity and also the dynamics of the private sector. And I think the first step is to bring them together so that they speak the same language and also understand the climate risk and understand the vulnerabilities, and then, of course, connect all of that, for example, in the context of adaptation, on the cycle of the adaptation cycle. We have the vulnerability analysis, the risk assessments, but also then the planning and implementation and the measurements. So with that exercise, then, of course, you can do much pulling demand for action. So there is some regulations coming from national governments to move into low carbon economy, and they have to follow certain standards. But also there are other benefits that the private sector will start perceiving once they enter into these risk management approaches, they can access, first of all, to better conditions. They can have more competitive space in the markets, and in particular case in the coffee plantations that we visit, of course, they will be able also to access to a number of regional markets that will then show the business case for actioning adaptation efforts in their plans, in their business model, but also from the mitigation point of view, being able to be ready with the standards to access to finance in the carbon market space as well. So there are these different levels in the equation, and it needs to go hand in hand with academia, it needs to go hand in hand with with researchers or support organizations, with education, youth, of course, all that will be coming and dealing with this new context from the climate angle. That will have to evolve together, and creating these spaces here is much important, and also sending the signals to the negotiation rooms and working in the NDC, SNAPs, long-term strategies, so that they all push together to the same direction. Thank you.
Thank you for that reflection, Carlos. And I think it's a very good signal that companies are starting to think about it, and that there is an interest to support these sustainable approaches as well. It's more in terms of a demand. How do we find a way that makes it easy for them to enter this sphere as well? So I think we can take one last question before we wrap up. So just having a quick look around, but everyone seems quite happy with the panel. So I would like to. Sorry. Yeah, sure.
I think I'm just trying to look at the issue of this complexity of the practices, agroforestry. I think it in itself is the one that is causing lack of adoption of the practices among farmers. And I think one of the most critical thing is the labor issue to manage, especially if you are doing this mixed intercropping of shrubs and crops. You have to regularly, trim or prune those trees. And I think it's too much labor for most of the farmers. And we've seen good work done on research station for so many years, even 20 years. But the uptake by farmers is still way back. So I think we need really to look at what are the best bets for agroforestry if we want to see more adoption of the practices. I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with this, I would like to thank the speakers for joining us, Juan Carlos, Excellency, Tristan, and the director from INPAR. This time I'm not trying to pronounce the name, but thank you so much for being with us. Please give them a round of applause for joining us in this wonderful panel. And I would like to thank you, the audience, as well, for making the time and for the very stimulating questions as well. I hope you have a lovely rest of the day. Take care.
For a picture, please. One picture of the panelists.